Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone. Hello, Mavericks and new viewers. Great to have everybody here. We have a lot to dig into tonight. Show us the money. That is what a lot of people are saying as Elon Musk and Doge continue to penetrate into the deepest, darkest recesses of USAID documents and accounting information. We'll dig into that tonight with our special guest, David Wiley, who has been on the program before. He's a political advocate and has some real expertise in this area. And we will try to separate, I guess, some propaganda from truth by trying to dig into what we hope will be facts and provide some clarity as more and more information comes out, more, I guess, propaganda gets out there too. So it's hard to know what's true and what isn't. Maybe we'll get a little closer to the truth tonight together. So stay with us. David will join us on the other side of this.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals. Defenders of individual rights and freedoms. Credible. Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, so what we're dealing with here tonight is a global purge inside USAID. We're seeing tonight that only 294 USAID employees are going to be kept by the Trump administration out of 10,000 around the world. here tonight to help us make sense of that and gain some context and perspective as it relates to the United States, USAID in general, and especially what's going on in Ukraine and spending there is David Wiley. Welcome back to the program, sir. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me back.
So you've been studying this very subject for a while. You've been digging into some reports, and tonight the reports we're getting from media is exactly what I said. They're purging employees globally,
Yep.
USAID. So just initially, just set this up for us, David, and give us your take.
They did that to start. Trump had an executive order kind of freezing everything and imposing a review. Now, everything asterisk, because he exempted everything to do with Israel and Egypt from that, which is a strange two countries to pick. Now, before that, probably, I think most people didn't even know what USAID was before last week. They're like, oh, USAID. And, they're believing all their commonly picked sources. So USAID is a program that goes back to the 1960s. And, for some people, that's a long time. For others, it's not nearly as long as they thought it would be for a U.S. program. And it was a way during the Cold War of pushing kind of soft power out there, of influencing nations to like us without, the Soviet use of, we'll send in the tanks, right?
Right.
That guns aren't the answer to every problem. And for that, it was good. The program has definitely had hits and misses over the years, continuing right up to today. I'm not going to even start to defend everything that the program has done or is doing, because there's obviously a lot of problems. And that's kind of the way that, actually most government programs are baked. Some of the worst offenders for corruption and wasteful spending are baked into the most essential programs. You see that with either party at all levels of government, city, state, federal. When it comes time to talk about cuts, and they usually start with, the fire department and the police, and you don't want to cut that, right? Going for the programs that people really view as essential. And the same thing is kind of happening with USAID. I mean, why is Egypt essential? Nobody's even tried to make a defense of that. But we're cutting, Ukraine, and I think what's going on in Ukraine kind of speaks for itself with the conflict. And, I also want to say that USAID, it's a really small portion of the aid that Ukraine is getting. It's non-military. It goes to civil functions like repairing electrical stations that Russia has blown up. It does a lot of what people would consider essential things around the world. It pays Syrian prison guards to keep ISIS prisoners, right? And that's something that's being ended as well. So there are some programs that, I've pointed out to a lot of people are like, oh, well, even, my extreme MAGA friends, oh, I don't really want that cut. Well, that's being cut. When you freeze everything on day one, you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The bathwater is pretty dirty and stinky, but, we got to be careful here.
Right.
And as an advocate, I would advocate when we're cutting programs like this, Argentina's been cutting a lot of programs, kind of extreme cuts. But the president there, while he's cutting everything, he's kind of expanded welfare, and he's been careful with this. A lot of things aren't cut like overnight, like is happening with USAID, but, it's a warning, we're cutting this in 3 months. We're going to figure out what needs to be cut. And I can't really approve of the way we're cutting this because it's kind of too drastic. I would advocate that we take the congressional route. A lot of people would say that's more constitutional, that it should be defunded. And the reason for that is that, private charities, like the one I represent, 501c3s and other groups, they'll pick up a lot of the slack. Again, this is civil. This is things that people could donate to and contribute to if they have the time. But, shutting these programs down overnight, doesn't really give anybody the time to pick up the pieces, doesn't give private organizations a chance to fundraise and really run with picking up the slack. It doesn't give government the time to figure out what's working and what isn't.
Right.
And that's kind of the disaster we're seeing. And I'm already actually hearing from this administration that, maybe we're going too fast. We cut unintended programs. We're having unintended consequences, right? So, this money went here and funded this, and oops, we shut down an important network that distributes other things. And
is it fair to say that because of the way they've done this, some people might actually end up dying because aid is being cut?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Ukraine, without some of these electricity plants that are being targeted, that, they expected U.S. money, and now it's, winter, where are they going to get it right now? Then, yeah, people may freeze to death. That's just the example in Ukraine. I'm sure there are examples in other parts of the world I'm not familiar with.
Mm-hmm. And there are vaccination programs as well that are dependent on some USAID.
There's education programs. There's all kinds of things. This impacts students. A lot of people have noted that USAID was really responsible kind of for the downfall of the apartheid government in South Africa. Some people think that's why it's being targeted. I'm not going to opinion on that. It's not really my role. But USAID did fund college education for Black South Africans and gave a chance for there to be an educated class in South Africa among the Black population to really take part when the apartheid government fell. So that really kind of, a lot of people say that was what led to the fall of apartheid. And that's kind of a role that USAID has, historically played. There's a lot of information, a lot of disinformation and misinformation going on right now about USAID. I can't even keep up with all the rumors. I think, Russia Today is spending a few hundred headlines every day. I'll just tell people, be careful, check the receipts on everything that you're reading. Don't believe half of what you see on the internet. Confirmation bias, it may feel good to believe what you're reading, but it's the worst enemy. I say that for the pro-Ukraine crowd. I say that for the anti-Ukraine crowd, because you too want to make an informed decision. Be very careful.
Yeah, well, here's Sputnik, right?
What are they saying today?
Well, I'm not even sure, but we're going to find out together because I haven't even looked. But looking now, USAID's color revolutions, destabilizing states for U.S. interests. What else? Hollywood CIA ties exposed. Celebs are special agents. I think that's connected to it. I have something else that I pulled up here just as I was doing some random searching just before we came on. So those are just a couple of examples.
I saw a Russia Today headline that USAID was responsible for the downfall of Assad. And it's like, are you guys trying to sell this program now? I'm not sure. Not sure that's going to play the way you think it is here in the USA.
Yeah, they also, for a long time, and I don't know if I still have it up or not, they've been saying that celebrities were paid to go to Ukraine. Paid millions of dollars each. Let me see here. Sean Penn, Ben Stiller, quite a number of others. Here's an example. I'll just bring these up. You just have to look on Twitter. This stuff's all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
It has been for some time. And it's information or propaganda, whatever, that, here's Ben Stiller accused of taking money to go and meet with Zelensky. This is quite some time ago, but being accused of accepting money from USAID, which he has just flatly denied. He says he didn't receive any money from.
Show me the receipts.
USAID. Yeah.
Maybe it's true, but show me the receipts if it is. And I'm pretty sure that Ben Stiller doesn't need the U.S. government to pick up the expense of a plane flight for them.
Yeah.
It's not actually that expensive to fly to Europe. It's certainly not outside the disposable income of celebrities.
Well, he's posting on X saying it's just flat not true. He says false, not true.
Yeah.
Didn't receive any money. I'm inclined to believe him, because that's exactly the kind of propaganda that is spun up by Russia. But what's the purpose of that? Is that to just destabilize things and cause more confusion and chaos?
There was a famous kind of ex-KGB agent who defected to Canada a long time ago, Yuri Bezmenov, and he talked about the KGB, kind of what they do. And it's, they may have rebranded, they're the FSB now, but in its heart, it's still the KGB. And what they do is they spend lie after lie, not to actually even convince you of it. Whether you believe any of them or not is not the point. The point is that you can't figure out what the truth is. They want you confused, either believing a lie or too confused to know the truth. That is the point. To just kind of flood the information sphere with so much bad information that you can't make a good decision that is relevant to your own best interests, right? That's the point of Russian propaganda. That's why you see hundreds of conflicting headlines coming from these Russian outlets. And they're just throwing it out there. They'll see what mud will stick to the wall. And when it's exposed as a lie, they've got a couple hundred more lined up. It becomes a game of exhaustion to even disprove it and debunk any of it.
And here's a post about George Soros received $260 million from USAID. He said this post saying he didn't spend his own money to destroy the American justice system. He used ours. There is and that kind of thing is difficult for people to navigate because there's a little grain of truth in it, but around it is wrapped this huge lie.
Yep.
And the reality is, as I understand it, and give me your thoughts on it, but there are some NGOs or organizations connected to George Soros's Open Societies Foundation that have received some funding for various projects around the world, but it's not like the money went directly to George Soros, $260 million for what is being suggested.
Absolutely not. And the $260 million is really kind of grossly inflated. It's taking a really huge bucket and pretending it all went to George Soros. It is a bald-faced lie wrapped in a kernel of truth, but it so far stretches the point as to it's just a straight-up lie.
The other one tonight that's circulating is the bishop that asked Trump to be compassionate during his inauguration, and then came under fire from the pro-Trump people, I guess, right? She's being accused of taking $53 million from USAID. And again, a little kernel of truth there, because as I looked into it, I found that the church, church organizations that she's associated with that received some money, but she didn't receive $53 million.
Well, let me put the USAID program in perspective. It is 0.06% of the U.S. federal budget, right? Which is basically a rounding error. It doesn't even come up to 0.1%. It is not the source of all corruption in the U.S. government. There's way more than that. But today's headlines would have you believe that everything bad came from the USAID program. Everything bad that ever happened. And I'm willing to bet that some of these headlines are probably even true, but the money came from a different source and not USAID. Every kind of international government that's involved in propaganda to Western people wants to spin this. It is coming fast and furious from every direction. And that's why a lot of it is so contradictory. And I would say, I think even, our own politics plays into it as well. There's a lot of homegrown propaganda that's playing into, as well as spinning off against this foreign propaganda. I thought it was actually hilarious today because I read a headline from a Russian outlet that was saying, "Oh no, this is propaganda. The USA didn't pay these celebrities to go to Ukraine; it paid these, right?" And it's all confused because it's all about, what's the best spin, and maybe this piece of propaganda isn't as good for us as what this other country is putting out. But in the line here is just be careful, people. When it was shut down, the gross budget numbers used to be available online, so that you could go and see where a lot of the money was being spent. It didn't give you enough of the details to really kind of tell where it ended up, but it told you who it was being paid out to initially. And that's all offline now. So with the shutting down of the program, it's actually harder to find out who was paid what.
And is it safe to say there's a political element to this? The purging. I mean, there has to be an overlay of politics into this because we're dealing with political parties, politicians, people with partisan interests.
There's 100 political elements to it. Look, this has been a program that a lot of legislators have stuffed pork into for decades. And I will be, I'm here to advocate for Ukraine. A lot of these programs, kind of this indefinite aid, in my personal opinion, should have ended a long time ago, right? Why are we still helping some of these countries decades after they've had a problem? Shouldn't private interests, shouldn't they take this over themselves by any stretch of reasoning, right? But it's a favor. Scratch your back, I'll scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's the usual horse trading that goes on. And yes, the American people are better off if a lot of these programs are ended. It's Democrat politics, it's Republican politics, it's foreign politics. It's a big mess. But it's all wrapped around some stuff that is very essential and does good and saves lives, right? Again, that's the baby in the dirty bathwater. And there are things in there that we need to save, whether it's the U.S. taxpayer paying for it because it is in our interest, right? And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about here a little bit later is what happens if we don't save Ukraine. And it is in our interest to keep some of these things at the very minimum, at least until private groups have a chance to take it over, or other countries, right? One of the things Ukraine is doing rapidly right now, since some of these programs are essential, they're going to European countries, right? Saying, hey, can you take this over? And it would have been nice if that was a conversation that could have been had in advance before people are getting their electricity, shut off because the money's no longer there to rebuild the station.
Yes. So, I mean, and just to be clear, because I think that you have a lot of people who are very skeptical and critical of
absolutely
USAID and the government in general in our chat tonight. But I mean, you're not sitting here saying that there's no problem. Quite the opposite.
No.
Yeah, but it's important to be clear and accurate and have proper context and perspective.
This is a rose garden amid a field of manure, right? To be clear, that's how I would characterize USAID. A lot of probably the people I advocate to are going to object to that description. It's not very favorable in Washington, D.C., but I've looked through it. There's a lot of pork. There's a lot of dirt there. And then there's the jewels that they always hold up to justify the program continuing. And I'm one of those. There are a lot of programs in there that absolutely should continue, that Americans want to continue. There's a lot of them that Americans want to end. I can't tell you the ratio. I'm not one of those accountants or opinion makers who's gone through the programs to tell you, even at a guess, what percentage is good or bad. But I've skimmed it. There's a lot of both. So we just need the chance, right? Americans need the chance to pick up this program, not end things overnight, to give the American people a chance to decide, okay, what do we want to keep here, right? What do we want the government to keep running, and what do we want to take over as private individuals and charities?
Okay. So one of the things that I've seen is their accusations, and I think it's true that Ukrainian media outlets have been receiving funding from USAID. I'm certain that there's truth in that, and that is,
Yeah, I saw
I
that.
think, because with the war, there's virtually no advertising that has been done. So in order to make sure that there's some sort of media operating in Ukraine at all, they've needed some assistance. I don't know what level that has reached there, but there's some truth to it. But of course, that's being spun by some tonight as though it's some evil thing going on that's being used to distort and spread propaganda. What's your take?
Yeah. My take is, and maybe it wasn't the right way to go for the government to go about doing this, but with the war, there was a lot of collapse of Ukrainian media outlets. And that's because, you have infrastructure being attacked. You have people who are journalists or do other essential functions fleeing the country. Remember, there's about 8 million refugees who fled the country for other parts of the world. That creates holes in industries all over the place. And a lot of things just started collapsing. And to people here in the West and to politicians who want good information, and good information does not just come from the government, right? So no, US politicians wanted private independent media in Ukraine to continue. And they said, we're going to fund it, right? And that may or may not be the role of the government, but they stepped in and they did that. And because they did that, others did not, right? And again, that's where I say, this can probably continue. There are probably others who can pick that up, but they need to be given a chance, right? So,
and look, I mean, I worked in television, radio for a long time, and radio stations, television stations, the internet, these things it's an essential service. Yeah. You need to make sure it's there because it isn't just about reporting the news either. It's about emergency broadcasts.
Yes.
It's letting people know if there's bad weather or a missile attack. Go to the bomb shelter now. You need these kinds of services in place for people to keep people safe and to let people know what's going on out there. It's vital.
Yep, it is. Actually, that was one of the things that happened in the early days of the full-scale invasion because infrastructure was hit, because people were missing. A lot of news was misreported. A lot of things didn't get out on time. And one of the things that the Ukrainian government did is forced consolidation of a lot of TV media and some other forms of media. Now, the Russian propaganda is that all Ukrainian media came under the Ukrainian government, and that is not at all true. So there's lots of independent internet-based media and others. But in radio and television in particular, a lot of companies were forcefully consolidated because, exactly as you indicated, they needed those emergency management systems in place. Okay, if we're getting out, a bomb warning or something else, it's got to go out on time. It's got to go out accurate. And if it doesn't, then people die, right? And there's a lot more loss of liberty in being murdered than in not having 4 separate companies do the same thing during a time of war. And so that was a decision they made to deal with it. And that's also part of why, the U.S. government and some others said, hey, we don't like that. We're going to send some money your way. We're going to keep some of these organizations independent, not depend on the government and so on. That was the decision they made. You can't have it both ways. So whichever way you think was right, it was just a choice that had to be made in a time of war.
Yeah. And something had to be done quickly, obviously.
Yes.
So you do what you have to do to survive, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, where else are you going to get an emergency broadcast system? Right?
Yeah. A lot of people here, it's easy to critique and say, oh, I don't agree with that. Would I have made the same decision if I was in charge? Probably not, being bluntly honest. Mm-hmm. But a decision had to be made, and it had to be made quickly, because if it wasn't made quickly, more people died. So that was the most important part, right?
Yeah.
And it was made, and now we've made kind of a counter decision too fast that introduces the same problem. Well, now we've not got to make another quick decision of how are we going to fix it again.
And I mean, on the flip side, domestically, we're seeing accusations that some media outlets within the United States, like Politico, have been receiving funding from USAID, and for political and partisan reasons, allegedly. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to dig into those kinds of accusations to get to the truth, as long as we're actually getting to the truth.
Yeah, but keep in mind, there's truths and half truths.
Right.
I could say that Twitter is government funded. Why? Because, well, Elon Musk gets money from the government for SpaceX and Tesla.
Yep.
And therefore, he made money off of those government contracts, and that enabled him to buy Twitter. Is Twitter government run? No. But if I wanted to propaganda spin that, it's an easy way to do it.
Then again, is it government run? It's owned largely, or at least controlled, by Elon Musk, who now controls the Department of Government Efficiency. He sits
Correct.
right in the White House. So how much more government control can there be behind a social media empire like X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it? He is the freaking government now. So it's government controlled, 100% in my view. And don't get me started on the hypocrisy behind Elon Musk and his position within the government and the Department of Government Efficiency. And he's the guy, just complete conflict of interest in my opinion. But
absolutely. I've actually spent the last few days kind of getting the message out, kind of countering some of the propaganda that he spread. One of the things he said just recently was that Zelensky arrested all his political opponents and outlawed the major political parties. And then Zelensky's main opponent, Petro Poroshenko, who was the previous president of Ukraine, did an interview with the Brookings Institute and said, no, I'm not in prison. My party still exists, right? Yes, I want to be president, again, right? He wants to do a Trump.
Right.
He was removed. He hopes to come back, but after the war, he was saying that now that the Ukrainian Constitution has it correct, and it is the Ukrainian Constitution. It's not a decision of Zelensky. The Ukraine's version of the Congress has to renew their martial law every 3 months or 90 days, something like that. So they're continuing to vote on it, and that, so long as they're in a state of war, they don't have elections. And even his main opponent says, yes, that's the correct thing. Russia wants elections because they want to divide Ukrainian society. Right now, all Ukrainians are united, defending for their lives. And if we had a big political contest with me versus Zelensky, we would be divided and not on the same front against Russia. Argument won me over. So, if you want to see that Zelensky's main opponent is, in fact, not in jail and has his own opinions, you can go to the Brookings Institute and watch that interview.
Sure.
But, it's obvious propaganda. I can't speak to the mind of Elon Musk why he's spreading it, but it's not true. Whether it's intentional or he's just listening to the wrong sources that are repeating Russian disinformation, the effect is the same. And again, be careful what you read. Check the receipts. Just last week, I think it was last week. Yeah, there was a piece of propaganda about Trump's proposed peace deal. It was all fake, but the way it got into the media, Russia inserted it via the Ukrainian language, which got Ukrainians to pick it up and broadcast it. So that's how insidious some of these things are. And so Ukrainians speaking about this in large numbers kind of pushed it into Western media and made it seem more authentic because it started with a Ukrainian language source that was not based in Ukraine, by the way. So even the language, like, oh, well, it's in Ukrainian, it must be safe. No. There's Russian propaganda that's even inserted into Ukraine in ways like this. So, again, check the receipts. It doesn't matter who is saying it. everyone falls for propaganda. I've fallen for Russian propaganda at times because, I believe things too easily that fit my confirmation bias. It happens to any and all of us, and there's just so much misinformation and disinformation floating around out there.
Absolutely, it's very effective, and the methods, the tools they have at their disposal now for all propagandists, regardless of the side they may be on, very sophisticated. Artificial intelligence is out there helping them fabricate, create an online reality for people. So let's take a little break. When we come back, we'll continue, and we're going to start to dig into this subject and then segue as part of that into what's happening with regard to this in Ukraine, and look at the larger issue of what's at stake with regard to overall funding and support for Ukraine, and what will happen if that support diminishes or is cut right off. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Here we go. Okay. So, David, when Trump was elected, I think a lot of people just expected him to just cut all support for Ukraine, especially with a lot of the, what was said during the campaign. But that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And now with all of this going on with USAID, I know there was even mainstream media reporting maybe a week or two ago saying when Marco Rubio announced the 90-day pause on aid, some people got confused and said that all funding for Ukraine at that point had been put on pause, but that really wasn't the case. So can you clarify? Can you clarify things? Where are we at with all of that?
Yeah. So Ukraine receives not a lot of non-military aid from the U.S. The vast majority of non-military aid is coming from Europe. Europe actually is contributing more to Ukraine overall than the USA in terms of funds. You got to convert some numbers there, exchange rates and so on. But once you do that, it's not even close. Europe is spending more tax dollars, euros than the US. But it's not military aid, right? Europe, and this very valid criticism from Trump, has not spent a lot on defense. The US has been paying largely for Europe's defense, and they've gotten kind of anemic in that department. And so the only place that sufficient military aid can come from for Ukraine is the USA. There's no one else out there who can really pick up the slack right away. We're the ones with the huge military stockpiles. And those military stockpiles exist in large part to counter Russia. Trump has recently talked about Greenland and Canada and security threats. Like, we need to annex Greenland because of our security interests. So, and I always ask people, security from who? Who's the threat that we need to take Greenland for? Because that answers the big question. The obvious threat that people, particularly Republicans, don't want to name out loud is Russia, right? They know it. They know it's the truth. And even, MAGA Republicans are really afraid of, well, what happens if Russia wins? What happens if we do back out of this and Ukraine can't stand on their own? Now we are 3 years past 3 days to take Kyiv, right? That infamous slogan. And there is no Russian path to victory right now if it is not handed to them by the world. There would have to be kind of a siege and cutoff of Ukraine. That's what they're more or less hoping for. They want some kind of peace deal that says that Ukraine can't arm themselves, they can't join NATO, and basically they can't defend themselves. And some years later, they'll come back to finishing off what they've started, back in 2014, for the record. But also right now, without support, Ukraine doesn't really have a path to ending this either. We will get stuck in a frozen conflict. And that isn't just bad for Ukraine. Russia is no stranger to frozen conflicts. They don't mind. They've got plenty of them. That's just something that they'll come back to later. But for the rest of the world that relies more on foreign trade, that is bad news, right? Because that means things don't go back. There's been some talk about rare earth metals. Well, those metals are in eastern Ukraine, on the front lines, or in a lot of cases, territory that's now occupied by Russia. You're not getting at those metals in any wartime, right? If we have a quote unquote ceasefire that is like it was before from 2014 to 2022, you're still not getting at those metals. Trade will not resume. And beyond metals, Ukraine has been one of the big bread baskets for that region of the world. And you might think, well, I don't care. But when starving people of Middle East and North Africa, they care, they have money, and they're going to spend that money buying from food sources that you do care about. Things will shift, right? Americans right now are complaining about the price of eggs, which, for the Eastern U.S., they get a lot of those from Canada. Right? We are dependent on each other. We have had a time period of unparalleled human prosperity in history. And that has come about because we have not been on these self-destructive wars of conquest. Nations have been peacefully trading with each other. Canada and the USA share the largest unarmed border in the world by far. And it's great. Goods flow back and forth, the benefit of both nations. Armies do not. We don't worry about, until recently, any talk about one country invading the other. Right?
Right. Please don't.
Well, I won't be marching up there. Right? I definitely don't support any invasions. One of the reasons why I support Ukraine, I am very anti-invasion of anyone, anywhere, by anyone.
Yeah. I can't believe we're even talking about this. You've been digging into this issue in Ukraine in some depth, though, and it has been studied to great degree by some very, learned people. Here, I'll bring up this study or report. Dollars and Cents, America's Interest in a Ukrainian Victory. Now, this is something you've referenced heading into tonight's broadcast. How has this been of assistance to you in making sense of where we're at tonight?
Well, first of all, this is a report paid for and published by the American Enterprise Institute, which is not at all known as a left-wing organization. Usually this is more referenced on the right. And this is looking at the cost of American defense spending if Russia were to win, right? So, okay, if Russia takes Kyiv, how does this affect our defense based on current projections, our commitments to NATO, threats from Russia? What happens? And what they found was that over the next 5 years, we would be spending $808 billion more.
Right there.
Yep.
$808 billion more in defense spending over 5 years than you would be spending already. So that's on top of the current projected budget.
And that's without considering China invading Taiwan or any other serious conflicts popping up. That is solely if Russia expands the front line to, Ukraine's western borders. And we have to look at, okay, now we've got NATO commitments to Romania, to eastern Poland. Poland already borders Russia, but that would be 2 borders with Russia, right? And other NATO partners. Most European countries are pretty small, so the flight time for a Russian missile over Poland to Germany to American air bases is pretty short.
It's I think imperative that people look at this from the other perspective, or the American and NATO perspective, not just from the Russian perspective, which is, well, we were forced to invade Ukraine because NATO expanded and is threatening us. But if this scenario continues to play out, what we'll end up with is Russian expansion into Ukraine, pushing up against European countries. We already have, we're told, Russia has moved nuclear weapons again into Belarus along that border. I think maybe even inside occupied Ukraine, tactical nuclear weapons. And they're, on the other hand, they're saying Zelensky wants to bring nukes back onto Ukrainian soil. They've already done it, and they're not denying it. They want us to know that they have the nukes there. So in reality, after the Cold War, and maybe I don't want to take up too much time here, but as I'm reading it, after the Cold War ended, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. There was the Budapest Memorandum saying that Russia and the United States and the UK, they all agreed they would respect the Ukrainian borders in exchange for Ukraine giving up the 3rd largest nuclear stockpile in the world. And now Russia has decided that they're not going to recognize Ukraine as a legitimate country. Putin has sent his forces in there, and now we're going to end up in a scenario where Russia will end up putting nukes back on Ukrainian soil and direct them at Europe.
Yeah,
absolutely. Am I off on that or not?
You're not wrong at all. And it goes actually further than that, because under the Soviet Union, most of the nuclear program was in Ukraine and Belarus, right? Now they already have access to what's left in Belarus, but key components, uranium was mined in southeast Ukraine, which, Russian armies are now sitting on top of. Rockets were developed in Ukraine, the ICBMs, the big intercontinental ballistic missiles. So even the ones sitting in Russia that they're aiming at the US and Canada right now, most of those were built in Ukraine, decades ago. And then the nuclear science programs were in Belarus and Kyiv. And that's a big key. They really want access to a lot of those Ukrainian scientists who will be forced in the old Soviet way, like you're going to make this for us or your family will suffer, right, to do a new nuclear program. One of the things that people don't realize, because they look at the numbers and Russia wants us all to be scared, like, oh, we have so many nukes. But most of those are small tactical nukes that are fired not on a missile, but from an artillery system. They have very few of the strategic nukes that can hit the USA. And the condition of those when we had the START treaty was actually pretty bad. So Russia was wanting to reduce the number of nuclear weapons because they couldn't maintain theirs. They were already deteriorating to a state that even inspectors noticed it, right? Because it's easy to actually fake a functional nuke because you don't get into the circuits. But if an inspector says, oh, look, those moisture seals, they're gone. That's no longer weapons grade uranium, right? And that was happening under the START treaty. They said, oh, no, but we're not counting those because they clearly don't work anymore. And that was actually one of the big reasons that Russia probably backed out of the START treaty, is they actually can't keep it up. And taking over Ukraine is part of the keys to them getting a strategic nuclear program back up and running again to really threaten the world with. Otherwise, yeah, their strategic nuclear program is expiring because it's largely based off Soviet tech. The same Soviet tech we're seeing fall apart and get destroyed in this war between Russia and Ukraine.
So if Ukraine falls, we'll see an increased threat to Europe, which means that the United States, the defense of the free world really largely falls to the United States. But you'll need to see all NATO countries step up their spending, especially the United States, and that 808 billion. I think that is 7 times more than the United States would spend otherwise. Is that
no? It's 7 times more than what the U.S. has already spent so far in all the years of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Okay.
So it's 7 times more than all the aid we've sent. Right.
Over a 5-year period.
Yes.
Yeah. So the cost is huge, and I think maybe that is the one of the things that people are really losing sight of here. In addition to that, we just saw Trump talk to Zelensky, and this kind of took me aback. But he said, "Well, we'll continue to fund you, but we want these resources." I have mixed feelings about that, but the resources are on the line. Russia clearly wants them. And if the United States and NATO pull out now, is it fair to say that any of the money that has been invested in this will just simply be lost, that there will be no positive financial outcome coming out of Ukraine because you won't have any access to the resources. You'll never get the money that has really been loaned to Ukraine in some instances back. So it's just like say goodbye to everything you put in. It becomes a negative investment. It's like just straight up money lost. Fair?
I actually have a very different take on it because people are kind of looking at this from a Western perspective and they just see the minerals. From a geographical perspective, those rare earth minerals, they're in eastern Ukraine. They're in basically the lands that the Russian military is sitting on right now.
Yeah.
And so that's a word to Putin, like, hey, I'm looking at supporting him and I am definitely going to get back those lands that the Russian army is on right now. I'm going to have a personal financial interest in it, right? It's some real politic going on, and people don't really get that. But, Ukraine can say yes, but it's impossible for Ukraine to deliver on if the United States doesn't help Ukraine get Donetsk back, because Donetsk is where that big resource of rare earth minerals are. And all of that stopped in 2014 because it became the front line of the war. Right. Ukrainian drones are now hitting deep within Russia. So them hitting Donetsk and any mining of uranium would be child's play, for them at this point. So that's not happening unless there's a peace and Ukraine is occupying that land. And that is actually a real commitment from the USA. Trump saying, hey, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a personal vested interest. So you can actually believe I'm going to follow through. He's saying I'll have skin in the game of this peace deal. So that's what I think is really going on.
Yeah. Are you able to comment on where you think the efforts to bring all sides to the table to discuss this are at? Do you have any thoughts?
I think it's futile on the Russian side right now. Trump famously said within 24 hours there'll be peace. I'll get Putin to negotiate. It's not going to happen. Putin has no interest in real negotiations. He says he's willing to negotiate, yes, but he's only willing to negotiate Ukraine's complete capitulation. And Ukrainians aren't interested in that. Even if the USA were to completely back out, Ukrainians know that that means a mass genocide on their soil. The political arrests and torture of everyone who supported the government, right? And it's not going to happen. A lot of people are just going to fight to the last man. And currently, with the current state of Russia, I don't think they could actually do it. Even if the U.S. completely backed out, just with European support alone, I think that Ukraine could keep, probably 2/3 of the country at this point. But that's, again, we're talking about a frozen conflict in which things continue to be bad for Europe and the world, really, for a long time. And frozen conflict is going to invite other bad actors to step forth. I'm talking specifically about, like China and Taiwan. Not just them, but other places will say, hey, now's my time. I can take a piece of my neighbor. You see a lot of that going on. And they're just waiting to see how this plays out.
And Russia's position at this point is not nearly as strong as I think maybe some people believe it is, because the energy infrastructure has been hit. Oil refineries, oil tankers are being targeted at sea because they're violating sanctions. The sanctions that are in place are now bearing more teeth than they did prior to that. Can you give me some perspective?
Oh, it's actually quite a bit worse than that. So they're now sending guys to the front line on bicycles because they just don't have the heavy manufacturing. They're not producing tanks and armored personnel carriers in sufficient numbers. They depend on a lot of Western resources, circuit boards, ball bearings, CNC machining that, they're not able to keep up. They're not able to get it. What they have is falling apart. So they're sending guys to the front in absolutely desperate conditions just to start out with. They don't last long. They don't have much of a chance. They're running out of all kinds of things. Russia is losing the war of attrition. That is, just bar none. I don't see how they can hold out another year. I do see how Ukraine can hold out another year. But I also don't see a way for Ukraine, without continued American support, to really end this conflict, to push forward. The cost of victory right now is not so much. The cost of Ukraine losing to us, not even counting the cost to Ukraine and Europe, cost of losing to us is actually pretty huge. That 808 billion number. And I really want to stress that is a conservative estimate. That's not talking about what we have to spend if China invades Taiwan and we have more security threats, right? Mm-hmm. That's not talking about what happens with the impacts to global trade, the loss of economies and other things. That's really just looking at, okay, what's our new defense spending have to be? So the real picture is going to be worse.
So this is a conflict that really is much broader in scope than just what's happening inside Ukraine itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole world is a stage. You have a lot of bad actors. You can count the USA among those bad actors if you feel like it. But people are kind of looking to see how this plays out before they make their next big geopolitical move. Biden was warning about China invading Taiwan as well, and he was right about Russia invading Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I believe that China intended to, but then they saw Russia make their play, and it didn't work out the way Russia thought it would. And China reassessed and said, maybe we're not ready. But they're looking to see if Russia can win, and they're using that as a model. How much do other countries support Ukraine? Are they fatigued? Or will they run out of support and not help Taiwan? And I'm just talking about two names that people recognize. There's a lot of smaller players around the world that are looking to do the same thing. Venezuela wants to invade its neighbor to the east in South America. There's countries in Africa that want to fight each other. And even if we never send troops, we never send weapons, these conflicts have repercussions to us. They cut off trade that we depend on, right? USA right now, I can go to the grocery store and I can buy bananas, as many as I want. It can just be taken for granted. It's easy. But those bananas came from South America. If there's a hot war in South America, then tomorrow I wouldn't be able to get those bananas that I expect to be able to have, right? There's lots of products from around the world. We are all tied together. If China invades Taiwan, then you can forget about, buying a new cell phone or computer probably, because those semiconductor chips are not going to be available, and the ones that are being used commercially are probably going to be repurposed for the military. So a lot of things happen. There are repercussions to every conflict, even if you're just sitting it out.
And Vladimir Putin has put himself in a position where I don't think he can quit at this point.
No. The Russian economy is fully converted to a wartime economy. Their oil infrastructure is falling apart. They're not making anything except weapons, right? He's making weapons to win this war, and the rest of the economy is on life support at best, or just being scavenged and ripped apart to support the war machine. And if the war were to end magically tomorrow, I think he would just be looking for the next conflict anyways. We've really got to, in my opinion, arm Ukraine to the point where he gets it that war is not an option, that he's not going to win, and that he needs to sue for peace, and he needs to give up these conflicts.
But the problem he has on the home front is 800,000 or more dead Russian soldiers. A heavy price has been paid by Russia to do this, and if he doesn't deliver something of substance as a result of all this, if he loses, it's going to put him in a pretty fragile position as the leader of the country, I would think.
Yes, but still kind of within the country, he's relatively strong. I mean, that's, because there's no one really to topple him right now, so he could be made to do it. I don't want to correct that number. There's easily at least 3 million missing Russian men in Russia.
3 million missing.
Yes. Now, about 1 million from the war that have been lost in the war in one way or another, and easily at least 2 million that have fled the country to avoid the draft, right, and not come back. And the important point is all those men are missing from the Russian economy. That is on its own a massive impact, right? So the Russian economy is not turning around tomorrow. It's not going to get back to its pre-war conditions in 10, 20 years, even if there were to be peace right now. And it's tooled up for a wartime economy. And the reason he's done that is he's fully committed to the path of war right now, right? If not Ukraine, if we don't stop him there, if it does become a frozen conflict, he'll probably station just enough soldiers to keep it frozen and look for another country to invade and absorb its resources. He's definitely got his eye on the Baltics, seeing if the NATO commitment is really strong to its allies.
And we've seen what appear to be efforts to expand this conflict. In fact, Putin has said that Russia is at war with the West and NATO. He's said it. We just haven't acknowledged it because I don't think we want to fight a war on that scale or in that way. So it's just like, ignore it. We're just not going to fight with you right now. But he has actually said that. And then we've seen these ships in the Baltics dragging anchors and cutting communications lines. So, it appears that Russia is involved in expanded cyber warfare. This is extending up into, space warfare, satellites. This is much broader than just what's going on in Ukraine, and he's the one expanding it, escalating.
Assassinations in Germany, sabotage of military factories in Europe. He's going to take this as far as he can. He's going to push until he gets pushback. Putin is a big fan of Stalin, and Stalin's, military slogan from being a general was, If you meet mush, push. If you meet steel, yield. And until he sees steel, until he sees a solid pushback from the West, he's going to keep pushing on all fronts, wherever he can. That's the way he's trained. That's what he thinks is the right thing to do. He's just going to keep going. And the more we show restraint, the more he's going to push. So we have to be firm and resolute. That doesn't mean we have to attack. It doesn't mean we have to go to war, right? We have options right now. It's why I'm a big supporter of Ukraine, right? We can stop this here.
Yeah. Ukraine
is putting their sons and daughters on the front. The price of peace is relatively low, can be relatively cheap. Really, if we really go out there and support Ukraine, not like what has happened the last 4 years where we kind of gave them just enough, but if we open up our arsenal and give it to Ukraine for the victory, then rather than having to scale up for a Russian threat, we could scale down because that threat will be eliminated, right? Ukraine can destroy most of the Russian military threat for us, and then we can downsize our military spending, refocus on deterrence against other threats. And that's where you actually get reduced spending. You don't get reduced spending by allowing foreign threats to become more threatening.
And in fact, what you're saying is really reinforced in this report, where they're laying out a scenario here and a projection that says if Ukraine is successful here, it will push Russia back into Russian territory, and with a diminished military, instead of the opposite, where they'll push forward, gain territory in Ukraine, and become a greater threat to Europe, and will give them an opportunity to reconstitute their military and then push forward with a projection, according to the report, looking ahead to 2030 and moves into other territories. Do you think that's an accurate report?
Yeah, I feel it's very accurate. Again, I think if anything, it's on the very kind of conservative estimate side. They're not hyping anything up. This isn't looking at other factors like what's the cost of losing deterrence. It's not bringing in China and other countries. This is very narrowly focused, looking at Russia. If Russia wins, what do we have to spend to keep NATO safe? So it's very narrow in scope. The reality is going to be far worse. But again, it's based on a pessimist scenario. What if Ukraine loses? I would like to see, I wish AAI kind of did the other report, which would be, what if there's a complete Ukrainian victory? What if Ukraine regains its territory?
Yeah.
The Russian military stockpiles remain depleted. What could we reduce? Right?
It's interesting you say that because
I want to be clear. Russia went into this war not with a big military industry. They're building that now. They went into this war with huge stockpiles from the Soviet Union and not so much of the ability to produce. And those stockpiles have been exhausted. That is why they've built up a wartime economy. That's why they're trying to build now. So if this war ends, they are not at all in a position to threaten NATO if Ukraine is victorious. Those stockpiles are gone. They don't have the tanks. They don't have the APCs. They have some strategic level assets. We'll continue defending against those, but that was always there, right? That doesn't get worse.
And to hear you use the words Ukrainian victory, I've been surprised actually to hear just within the last week some other analysts out of UK and elsewhere suggesting that Ukrainian victory might actually be something that is realistic to look at if the resources are provided. Is that where you're at with this? And if so, what does victory look like? What does that mean?
A return to the 2014 borders. Ukraine gets back Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and we get back to the internationally recognized and respected borders. That's what victory means. That's what it looks like. And yes, I believe it is very realistic, but Ukraine needs the material to make that happen. They have the manpower. And yes, I know Russia always comes up, oh, we have more manpower, but Russia doesn't have the material. They don't have a way to get the material. Ukraine can get the material from the USA, right? So if we give them the material, which, again, we have huge military stockpiles, and if Ukraine is victorious, we don't need those land war stockpiles. And I know a lot of people say, oh, what about a conflict with China? A conflict with China is not going to be based on land, right? So if Ukraine's victorious and China decides to invade Taiwan anyways, we don't need so many tanks and artillery pieces. It'll come down to Navy and air assets and other things. It will be primarily a battle at sea. But I think if Ukraine is victorious, that Chinese invasion of Taiwan never happens, right? Because they will see the support and they'll go, this isn't a good idea. Let's just keep on trading and being peaceful with Western nations instead.
And I guess one of the other costs of losing Ukraine would be the West's loss of Ukrainian brain power, soldier power. They've been building up an actual industrial base there to produce weapons inside Ukraine. You have a drone industry that is now cutting edge. You have a battle-hardened military with real experience on the front lines. If Russia is victorious, all of those resources, all of that experience, all that know-how flips, and they'll absorb that and then turn that against NATO and the West and the United States.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% realistic scenario.
Yeah,
it's exactly what happens. I mean, we're already seeing it, with the nuclear power plants that are taken over. Ukrainians are forced to work. Their families are threatened if they don't. So they have to donate their expertise to Russia, or, their loved ones suffer.
And here's something else that might put things in perspective for people in a historical way. This is kind of a replay of in Ukraine that we've seen many times in the past, not the least of which was what happened during World War II, where you had the Soviet Union in Ukraine occupying territory, then Germany came in with the Nazis, then they occupied, and you had the people of Ukraine being essentially forced to pick a side, who you're going to fight with, right? Who you're going to support. And so sort of like, here we go again, except that in this particular case, at this point, at this juncture, they're really fighting for their independence finally, their sovereignty, not to be part of Nazi Germany or not to be part of the old Soviet Union, but they are actually fighting really for their independence, their right to survive as a sovereign nation state and to preserve their culture, which is what I think they've wanted for the people there for many generations since before World War II.
Yeah. I've been to Ukraine. I don't have any Eastern European heritage. I don't have that personal connection that some people do. But I've been there. And one of the things that really impressed me about Ukrainian history as an American was that they have a long history of loving liberty, of fighting for freedom. Whether Cossacks or others. So during Euromaidan, back in late 2013, early 2014, that kind of kicked everything off. One of the slogans in Ukrainian was "No slaves allowed in heaven," right? So it was really kind of, we're going to be a free people. It was a strong determination. We are going to be free. And it's actually an old Cossack slogan. So it's not something that they just came up with. They reached into their heritage and said, we are a free people, no slaves allowed. And I think it's really that Putin is most afraid of. He does not want a culture on his border that speaks Russian and can export a love of liberty to his own people, right? So he is ruling the country like the czars of old, and the people are serfs or slaves under him. And the most terrifying thing is those Russian people learning that they could rise up and be free themselves, that they don't have to have the masters. That's what he really can't allow. That's why there has to be this awful genocide in Ukraine. The excuse is, oh, I'm freeing the Russian speakers, but they're the ones who are suffering the worst genocide right now, right? So these cities that are absolutely devastated in the East, where people were native Russian speakers, where they were ethnic Russians that were brought in there by Stalin to displace ethnic Ukrainians, they have to be purged and gotten rid of because they believe in liberty, right? So they are a threat to his empire.
Right.
They have to be controlled or killed.
Zelensky really kind of highlighted that in the interview he did with Lex Fridman, where he talked about the dedication that the Ukrainian people have to preserving their culture and their language, which is why even during the interview at points he was insisting on speaking Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And
Zelensky is a native Russian speaker himself, right? So that's kind of always perplexed me about that propaganda. Like, they're trying to eliminate Russian when their president is a native Russian speaker that had to learn Ukrainian as a second language.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole Russification of Ukraine, the what appears to be an effort to, and I don't. This is not a stretch. This isn't just a genocide on a scale of human death. This is an attempt to commit an act of cultural genocide against Ukrainian culture. That's really what's at stake here. This is a question of, will Ukraine as a people, as a culture, as a country actually be able to survive?
Yeah. And if he's successful there, it will continue on. There's already, he's already got his enclaves in Moldova and in Georgia and in other neighboring countries. He's carved out pieces of those, again, in defense of the Russian speakers.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's like us, we're here in Canada and the USA. We speak English. That doesn't give the UK a right to invade us and take us over. And just because we speak English doesn't mean we want to be ruled by the House of Lords in England.
And please don't invade us just because we speak English. We have some French people up here too. I don't think you want them, because they'll insist that you put French on your cereal box. It'll be bilingual, I'm telling you. It's going to increase your printing costs. Trump may not want that. But that being said, this really highlights what is really going on here on another level, which is that there is an ideological, a philosophical, and a geopolitical goal here that I think is shared on some level, even between some people within the conservative movement in the West and the Putin clan in Russia, insofar as they're seeing the development or the creation of larger geopolitical land masses controlled by the great powers of the world. That's kind of what's beginning to play out. That's why Canada's in play in a way, because Trump's concerned about the security of the North, because the Arctic is coming into play between Russia and the United States, NATO countries. So the world is, in the view of some of these leaders, the world is being reshaped into a multipolar a new geopolitical reality. It's all part of a new vision for the future. The question is, which future, which new world order will we ultimately end up with? That, or the way we were moving forward before, toward more liberal democracies or whatever.
Right? Yeah. History shows us this. This is the same way of thinking that led us into World War II, with the spheres of interest of the great powers, where the Nazi Germany said, this is our sphere of interest. We carve up this. This is the Soviet sphere of interest. This is the American sphere of interest. And those spheres don't have defined borders. So the major military powers come into conflict, right? Even Hitler and his ally Stalin, it was just a question of who was going to backstab the other first. And, you get the exact same language. Putin has been using spheres of interest. Ukraine is in our sphere of interest. No.
Yes.
After World War II, post-World Wars, we said we're going to recognize sovereignty. The borders might not be fair, but we're going to keep them as they are because war sucks. War is loss. War is death. But people like Putin look back on that time period of nostalgia of the great, Soviet Russian Empire, and they want to go back to times of conquest. China sees itself increasing its power through the military because they don't quite understand this soft power, this trade. The U.S., I do consider we are kind of an empire, but we're a unique one because we've mostly come to that way not through conquest, but through trade.
Yes.
Most of U.S. expansionism has been through land purchases, purchasing Alaska, Louisiana purchase, right? We've bought most of the land, or we had independence. It wasn't so much, we didn't have a series of wars of conquest like others. And the power we project around the world to Europe, or even now to Canada, as we're talking about stupid trade wars, is economic power.
Yes.
Right? It is a way of solving conflicts other than by violence. And it is the best period of a otherwise bloody human history.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head there. The United States has expanded its sphere of influence around the world largely because the West, not just the United States, but Western free market economic countries have been spreading prosperity, and other countries have said, okay, we'll join you because it's a better standard of living, it's peaceful, it's going to mean a better future for my family and my kids, so we want to be part of that, not part of this over here, which is why when you look at what Ukraine wants, what they wanted was to join the European Union rather than continue larger economic ties with Russia, because their standard of living was much lower than, say, a place like Poland, where after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was the standard of living, the level of income, many, many times higher in Poland than in Ukraine. So it's that better quality future, a higher standard of living, more affluence, prosperity. That's what's attracted people to the U.S. largely. So as long as, if you do come to invade Canada anytime soon, just bring the piggy bank, because that'll be what, and the tax cuts. That's what's enticing people up here already. Just leave the tanks behind. We don't have anything.
We have a pretty good system.
There you go. Just come on in.
I think we have things pretty good right now. We want to increase people buying American, but by day I work in a manufacturing industry, and the U.S. isn't a raw material producer. We get most of our raw materials from Canada. Where are our minerals coming from? Canada. Where are metals coming from? Canada. Where do our wood products come from? Canada. Where does a major source of our crude oil come from that we refine? Canada. So we don't actually have a lot of American products without Canada.
Uranium, nickel, aluminum, even, a lot of your steel as well. And we're not I can understand why Trump is concerned about steel coming from, say, China, which was being dumped, right, at lower prices. But we're not really we haven't been a national security threat. We'll continue to provide steel for you. We're not going to cut you off. It's all cool.
Yeah.
So we're friends.
We've got our differences, but, we work it out peacefully. People go back and forth.
I hope so. I have to tell you, though, I am actually very worried about this. This has been very disruptive to our country, and this is a sidebar discussion. I didn't think we were really going to get into, Trump's comments about making us the 51st state, but I don't really like it, and it's really ripping the country apart already.
It's not real. It's not going to happen. Canada.
I don't know about that. I have to disagree with you, but go ahead.
Well, it's certainly not going to happen from the Republicans, because Canada becoming a part of the USA right now would be the permanent end to the Republican Party. You guys lean further left than us. It would be the greatest gift to the Democrats here in the U.S. ever by the Republicans for us to annex Canada. So it's not going to happen. But I think the rhetoric plays harmfully in the international theater to justifying the propaganda from Russia and China to promote conflict rather than peaceful solutions, to justify their wars. Because they're looking at, oh, look, Trump's saying he's going to annex this and that, so we're justified in annexing Ukraine or Taiwan or whatever we feel like next week.
Yeah. Respectfully, I disagree. I think there is an actual real existential threat to our country because of what Trump is doing. And you probably aren't aware, but Steve Bannon even made comments today in an interview with a Canadian media outlet outlining exactly what I've been saying for the past 2 years. And it all goes back to Duginism, Eurasianism, fourth political theory, and the overall ideology of carving the world up into greater land masses. And he talks even about the situation in the Arctic and the need to assert a U.S. presence up there for national security reasons for the United States and Western countries. But that being said, even though he's saying all that, I hope you're right and I'm wrong, because I'd like to keep things kind of more the way they are. And I don't think we need to be part of the United States in order to work collaboratively and provide security, which we've been doing anyway. To me, all this seems very unnecessary, but other people seem to have other ideas. We'll see how it plays out.
In my opinion, and while I do think there are people in the Trump cabinet who are serious about this and saying this in all earnestness, I think Trump himself is using it as what he calls part of the art of the deal, right? He's using it to negotiate. He's putting these people out forth and kind of adopting some of their slogans because he wants the reaction to maneuver things. I don't think he's serious. So I think under a Trump presidency, not likely to happen. We'll see who the next Republican candidate is. And I do think the rhetoric is bad and sets a bad precedent. So it's not that I'm not concerned about it. I just think that the real threat is going to come later.
Are there other aspects to the situation in Ukraine and USAID that we haven't touched on yet tonight that you want to focus on or add?
I think not really USAID. I kind of feel like I said my piece on USAID, right? It needs to, rather being axed overnight, if you want to end it, that's fine. End the funding, but, give other groups a chance to pick up the piece and save the good programs in there. I'm not going to take a partisan position on that because there are arguments back and forth, and that's outside my role here as an advocate, whether USAID as an agency should stay or go. Everybody's free to make up their own mind. We talked about, kind of what happens if Ukraine wins or loses. I do want to say, there's a really good chance Ukraine can win this. They need the material support. Will it cost something? Certainly there will be a short-term cost, but I think long-term it's all benefit. It's an investment. Don't be afraid of the sticker price, because peace pays a dividend. Peace pays a huge dividend.
And pulling the plug right now, I think even Trump has seen that that it doesn't make any sense now that he's getting, I think, better information, better intelligence now that he's actually in power and he has the real information coming to him, not just people around him feeding him other stuff.
Let me talk about what I see going on in American Republican spheres. There's a very extreme divide on the issue of Ukraine. It's not the most important issue among Republicans. Among Democrats, Ukraine's a much higher priority. Among Republicans, whether they support it or oppose it, it's not as big of one of their priorities on either side. And that's just, that's based on poll data. That's based on talking to people. That's based on talking to congressmen. It's not as big of a priority as other issues, say like the national budget. National security being another one. So that's why I'm often bringing it back to that. But there is a foreign propaganda war for the Republican Party. It has been in place for years now. Russia, China, and others have decided that American conservatives are in play and up for grabs. And I can't say that they're wrong. So there has been a lot of propaganda targeted at those who lean to the right. We saw that kind of exposed a little bit this last year with the revelation that Tenet Media was being paid by the Russian FSB to insert points. It's not just Tenet Media. It's obviously it's going on all over the place. So there's really kind of a war for the minds and the thoughts of people on the right side. They've largely kind of given up on the left. I think that was kind of a mistake on their side, that they assumed that the left would not really unite against opposing Russia. It worked during the Obama years. Remember, Putin's original invasion was in 2014, and Obama didn't really do anything until the Senate pushed him to. It was President Trump in his first term who really first seriously armed Ukraine and opposed Russia, not just in Ukraine, but in Syria. And so a lot of people thought that he would just roll over. And I think he did that. He rode that to get elected. I don't think that's his personal conviction. I don't think he has such strong convictions on Ukraine personally. And that's where the role of advocacy really comes in. So if you're an American here tonight and you feel strongly about the issue of Ukraine like I do, you need to be talking. You especially need to be talking to your senators right now. They're listening. They're kind of sticking their fingers up in the air and seeing which way the wind blows. And they're feeling a lot of cross currents on the Republican side. But all the noise in Republican media is anti-Ukraine. But that is not the truth at all. There is a lot of quiet, strong support in Republican circles. And polls are showing that half of Republicans, at least, still support arming Ukraine. So they need to speak up. Other groups as well. I know libertarians have been kind of a mess, kind of fallen into disarray. But for those who still believe in non-aggression, who are against one country invading another, they need to speak up and be heard. Both sides will actually listen to you. If you are not a Republican or Democrat, if you're an independent or third party, it does not mean at all that your voice is not listened to in DC. They know where the votes are. They know that there are not enough partisan voters to reelect them. So they count on winning a certain percentage of independent voters and third-party voters to vote for them in the end. So they will listen to you. They may not go your way, but they're going to listen. So make your voice heard.
And just, I guess in closing, it's important to understand that the most important thing is that we're dealing with real lives, real people.
Yeah.
And Ukrainians, real, just everyday, regular people, the people of Ukraine, they're the ones paying the ultimate price, and they've paid with their blood.
And, not just Ukraine. I hope this talk of tariffs really brings home to people all across North America just how interconnected we are, right? So the loss of trade thousands of miles away seriously impacts you sitting there in your home. It impacts your way of life. So even if you can't be brought to care about the lives of people over in Europe, I hope you care about your own way of living, because it will suffer as war becomes more prevalent in the world and peaceful trade falls out.
David, really appreciate you spending the night here with us and giving us your take on this broader perspective, and I think you've helped us all make a little bit more sense out of a lot of political chaos that's confronting us. I'll just throw it back over to you for a final thought tonight.
The chaos is going to continue. The most important war isn't even the one that's being fought with bullets in Ukraine. It's the war of information. It's the war to deceive the entire world. So again, check for receipts, even when it looks like it's true and you say, I believe it. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it could be real. Check the receipts. And maybe it'll be true next week, the way our current political theater is playing out, but it might not be true right now. There is so many lies and misunderstandings going around that you should just reflexively disbelieve everything until it's proven. That's the safest way to develop a healthy mindset about anything that's going on with international politics right now.
Okay. And stick around after the show. I'll chat with you briefly. But folks, I'm going to leave you with this tonight. Again, you know the song. This is another brick in the wall, as some people in the world want to put walls back up after we saw the walls come down after the Cold War, as they try to form some sort of a new world order. The question is, who will be successful and what will that new world order ultimately look like? And with that, my thoughts tonight, and I hope yours as well, are with the people of Ukraine and even the Russians who continue to lose their lives in this conflict. Love you guys. I'll see you all again tomorrow night right here, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side.
We watched the old wall crumble, we heard the freedom's call, but now it's rising higher under Putin's shadowed thrall. From Ukraine's fields to Moscow's streets, a cold divide begins to creep. A world of fear where truth is bent and promises are sold too cheap. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're calling Putin's fall. We don't need their blind instruction, we've seen the lies unfold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. He speaks of glory of days long past, where all would kneel before his cast. With tanks and threats he stakes his claim, while silencing those who dare to blame. Propaganda clouds the mind, we don't need no education. Blind to the bloodshed and the strife, where Putin's dreams cut deep like knives. Can't you hear the children cry? Can't you see the tanks roll by? In Putin's world where truth is broken, we're just pawns in the lies unspoken. A wall of fear, a wall of light, where freedom fades into the night. We stand upon the edge once more as Cold War ghosts return to life. They tell us not to question, to walk in shadowed lines, but we've seen the fall, we felt the cold, we know the weight of all their crimes. Ukraine's cries, a world denied, a broken bridge that's left behind. In Putin's quest for power's throne, they're building walls we can't condone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're trapped within his thrall. We don't need their false direction, we see through the stories they've sold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they've built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we can see, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.